Britain their home? The answer is British values. These are the values of equality under the law, the presumption of innocence, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, love of family, and love of country. These values have been exported across the world. They gave birth to the United States, to Canada, to Australia, and many others. These values in a historical context are nothing short of a miracle. They can be subscribed to by those of all faiths and races, and they are worth protecting. Millions of brave men and women gave their lives in the world wars to do so. And today, I simply see too few people willing to offer a wholehearted defence of these British values. I am hugely grateful. I am hugely grateful for the opportunity that Britain has given me and my family. In fact, it's one of the few countries in the world where my story is even possible. So nobody knows better than I the contribution that immigrants can make to Britain. My parents came here 40 years ago with little more than a medical degree. Since then, between them, my parents have given half a century of service to our NHS. My mother, at the age of 68, still works as a nurse out of love of her profession and her passion as a caregiver. They both made big sacrifices to give me a great education. I started a company, created hundreds of jobs, and have paid millions in taxes. So nobody knows better than I the contribution that immigrants can make to Britain. However, when my parents emigrated here in the 1980s, annual net migration to Britain was around 50,000. This meant public services were not overstretched, and new arrivals could assimilate comfortably. Last year, that number was 650,000. We have lost control of our borders. We have no coherent immigration policy. And this is impacting all British people, regardless of their race or religion. And there are real consequences to this. To our young people, I say you are being betrayed. You are being robbed of a fair opportunity. Almost a third of young adults under 30 still live at home with their parents due to the lack of affordable housing. Yes, we must build more homes, but we must also halt the exploding demand. Our NHS is buckling under pressure, despite us spending more on it than ever. Waiting lists are at all-time highs. Getting a GP appointment is a nightmare. We have been failed by our incompetent political leaders. The state we are in was brought into focus for me by a caller to a radio show I heard recently. He called up to tell the story of his mother, who was in her 90s and who had been taken to hospital. Having worked hard and paid taxes in this country her whole life, she was now extremely sick and she'd been taken to the emergency room. His voice breaking with grief, he recounted how she had to wait hours and hours and hours to get attention. And by the time that attention came, Tragically, it was too late for her. Having paid her dues to this country decade after decade after decade, she died without dignity in the country that had failed her. And this is no isolated incident. 19,000 people were left waiting in accident and emergency for 3 days last year in this country. 19,000 for 3 days. This is not something we are willing to accept. This is unbecoming of Great Britain. And this is no fault. This is no fault of our amazing frontline NHS workers who work so hard in awful conditions for us. It is squarely the responsibility of our political elites who have so catastrophically failed in their duty to take care of the people of Britain. It does not have to be this way. It is time to put British people first. It is time for us to reject the political elites who scold and sneer at their own voters, the people to whom they owe their salaries and those whom they are supposed to represent. You know, there are those who claim that Britain should be ashamed of its history. To them, I say no. On the contrary, no country in the world has a history of which it should be more proud than Great Britain. Not only did Britain invent the common law principles that gave birth to the United States, to Canada, to Australia, that does not begin to tell the story of just how much Britain has done to make the world a better, freer place. Great Britain was the first global power to abolish the slave trade, all the way back in 1807, when our Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act. Upon passing this law, Britain formed a new Royal Navy squadron, the West Africa Squadron. We dispatched it to patrol the high seas and enforce this ban on the slave trade. His Majesty's Royal Navy, the mightiest navy the world had ever seen, faced down the slave ships and forced them to comply. In doing so, the heroes of the West Africa Squadron freed 150,000 slaves with the sacrifice of 17,000 of its own sailors and enormous financial costs. The world owes a debt of gratitude to Britain. But this great country is now in trouble. That famous British courage has been replaced with the cowardice of our political leaders. Leaders who are unwilling and unable to stare our greatest challenges in the face and overcome them. But change is coming. Change is coming. We are building a movement built on courage and powered by love. Love of British values, love of our heritage, love of our culture, love of our veterans and our war heroes, love of our family, love of our country. As a technology entrepreneur, I can tell you that in this new era, Britain has huge potential, full of dynamism, talent and energy. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. This island of ours is home to 3 of the world's top 10 universities. We invented the television, the MRI, IVF. We invented the steam and then the jet engine. We invented the computer and then we invented the internet. I said the world owed a debt of gratitude to Britain. And now we are a major player. We are a major player in artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. Britain should be thriving. Britain should be thriving. So why has the quality of life for British people gotten so much worse? You know, as someone who built a successful business from scratch, I can tell you many of the biggest problems we face as a country are not difficult to solve. All we need are political leaders who actually want to solve the problem and possess the courage to do so. You can all see this. You can all see this. You can see that what this country needs is fewer overpaid, incompetent NHS administrators and more doctors and nurses. You know this country needs fewer bureaucrats and more builders, fewer diversity officers and more police officers. Less time lecturing other countries about their borders, more time defending and securing our borders here at home. This is a movement for British people of all races and faiths who love their country, a movement for those who want to see British values protected, who wish to see our culture celebrated. But let us be under no illusions. This mission will not be easy. Quite the opposite. We will have to face down the entire political and media establishment who hate us for what we love. As they see our movement grow, they will roll out the heavy artillery and they will come after us with everything they've got. In fact, they already are. Thankfully for us, we have an ace up our sleeve. We have a real leader. In Nigel Farage, we have a real leader. We have someone to inspire us in the belief that victory is possible. He inspired me, he has inspired you, he will continue to inspire millions across this great country. We have a leader who loves this country, who spent his whole life campaigning for the interests of British people. And now he has come out of retirement, by popular demand, to lead us out of despair and into a state of hope for this country. He will face down those who seek to destroy us. He cannot be deterred by slurs or milkshakes. And just as he took on the banks and won, just as he took on the mighty European Union and won, now he will lead us as we take on the elite political class, and we will win. Let me tell you something. I know Nigel Farage personally. I have seen firsthand how hard he works for us. 20-hour day, after 20-hour day, after 20-hour day. He leads us on this journey at huge personal cost. He carries a heavy burden on his shoulders for us, and he does so with the grace and good humour that only Nigel can. So I think we should take a moment to be upstanding and say thank you for that. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for giving us hope again. Thanks for giving us something to believe in again. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake. We are living through history being made in this country. In 100 years' time, they will study this pivotal chapter of British history. Children will learn of prime ministers who locked down their own people in the most authoritarian, draconian fashion, and then threw parties for themselves in Downing Street. They will learn of politicians who appear to hate themselves and their country so much that they place bets on themselves to lose. They will learn of a political class that betrayed its own people. They will learn of a Britain that was on the ropes. But I believe they will also learn something else. They will learn that something remarkable then happened. That just as has happened so often before in British history, the British people stood up and said, no, we are not having it. I see a Britain in the future which has secure borders. I see a poised and powerful Britain which celebrates its proud history and looks forward with confidence to its future. I see a Britain that protects its values and cherishes its culture. I see a Britain with patriotic, highly capable leaders. I see a Britain in which, after having paid your taxes your whole life, you can go to the hospital and be seen by world-class doctors and nurses at once. I see a Britain in which our young people can not only afford to move out of their parents' homes, but one in which they can afford to buy a home of their own. I see a Britain which puts British people first. And this is no pipe dream. This is now truly on the cards. Just look around you. It is a real possibility. If it weren't, I would not be standing before you now. We know in our hearts that this is possible. So, to British people, young and old, to British people of all backgrounds, I say this. It is time for us to stand up and write the next chapter in the great British story. It is time to put the needs, the hopes, the dreams of British people first. It is time for reform. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Enjoy that? Thought so. To our next speaker, I'd not met Richard Tice before 2019, when I first started working alongside him in the Brexit Party. At the end of 2019, an overwhelming number of people felt under a Boris Conservative Party with an overwhelming majority the things that we cared about might be taken care of. And so they got behind the Tories and supported them in their efforts. But a few of us felt that too many times over too many years the Conservative Party had broken promises, let us down, and reinforced that heartfelt belief that you can never trust a Tory. And with that in mind, amidst the laughs and the sniggers, and the many people telling us that we were mad, a small group dedicated ourselves to that insurance policy, to make sure that it was maintained, and to make sure that if the Tories ever broke their promises again, they would be made to pay the price. And that price came in the form of Richard Tice. when I sat with Richard in 2020, early in 2020, talking through how we could make this a viable political alternative, I had no idea at that point just the level of humility, care and commitment that Richard possesses. Qualities that you simply will not find in any establishment politician. It's no secret that, yes, he's sunk tremendous amounts of his own resource into the party, but far beyond money, Richard has listened to and supported the people who need and support us. And I'm not talking about finance. I'm talking about driving to Oxford on a Sunday morning at 6:30 to support a candidate who's running in a council by-election, speaking to rooms of a dozen people or so around the country to help get reform off the ground, often getting home in the small hours. And of course, I'm talking about a man who, upon realising that we needed to hire a campaign bus, just went and bought one. And sat on the top of it now, by the way, is Anne Widdecombe on the top of Tice Force 1. Hi, Anne. Give Anne a wave. The thing is, ladies and gentlemen, that Richard knows that this is all about people, and it's a team effort. And he has led from the front. He's led not by telling, but doing. He's led by example. And because Richard has led by example, by spending time out with people, learning what they need and want, and mucking in, that's what we're now starting to see across the country, a team effort. So Richard Tice might not have been the leader that everyone expected, but I am absolutely certain that he was the leader at the time that people needed. And I just want to emphasise this. To end the establishment's feeble attempt to portray a crack in our team, as the Chief Exec, I am in a unique position to tell you categorically that Richard, having held the role of leader admirably for the best part of 4 years, wasn't just happy for Nigel to return as leader, but actively encouraged it. Because, yet again, knowing the values of team, he knew that Nigel could bring qualities to the party that would benefit us and take us to the next phase in our journey. But be in no doubt, never forget, this party would not exist, this opportunity would not be here, if it were not for our next speaker. Please welcome an incredibly generous man, an example to us all, my friend, our former leader and now party chairman, Richard Tice.
What a vision, what a sight. Are you having fun? Are you sure? Excellent. It's great to see so many of you here having fun and passion and enthusiasm and conviction. Do you think Keir Starmer could organise this sort of event? Do you think Rishi Sunak could organise this sort of passion and conviction? Only Reform UK can organise such an event. Not only are we having fun here, but I've got to tell you, all of you, most of you, many of you, out on the campaign trail, hopefully you're having some fun too. There's an extraordinary thing going on out there. I have to say I'm loving it where I'm campaigning. It's remarkable. We're having a load of fun. Lots of people saying, I'm with you, I'm with you. It's very exciting. People come along and give me hugs, but you must always keep your feet on the ground. And you must never think you've convinced everybody. As I learned the other day, I knock on one door, I get a big hug, and I think, yes, we're going to win. 4 doors down, I knock on the door, and there's a technique to this. You knock on the door and you take a step back. Just so the punch doesn't quite reach you. The door opens. The lady looks at me. I look at her. She looks at me again and she shakes her head. Not a chance, and slams the door. It keeps your feet on the ground, but we are having an extraordinary impact on this election. Something's happening out there. There's a whole bunch, there's millions and millions of shy reformers. Do you remember those shy Brexiteers? Now there's millions of shy reformers who on Thursday are going to come out and vote reform. Now, I'm very grateful to Paul for his kind words. He's a brilliant chief exec. I've never known him be quite so nice about me. Thank you, Paul. I just want to say a few words about the journey, because it has been pretty remarkable. It was just over 3 years ago that Paul and I looked at each other, a bit like that lady in the door, and we thought, well, what do we do now? And just think about it. We were 0% in the polls. We had a new brand that nobody had heard of, and we had the equivalent of effectively no money in the bank account. I mean, it wasn't a great outlook, to be honest. And Boris was up there in the polls, but we thought, I tell you what, let's buy a bus. It's one of the first investments we made. And here it is today, the bus with Anne Widdecombe on top of it. And that bus is helping campaigning. And then where I'm campaigning, my constituency, we've got a taxi. You may have seen on social media the taxi, it's decked out in our colours with the Union Jack on, and most importantly, it's got a megaphone. And last Monday, Widders was on the megaphone, driving through Boston and Skegness, shouting, "Vote Reform, vote Tice." It was remarkable. Old school campaigning. And everyone laughed at us back then. They said, "You're wasting your time. What are you doing? Go back to property." I tell you what, folks, they're not laughing now, are they? They're absolutely terrified. That's the truth. The Tories are terrified, which is why we're getting all the flack. What does it mean if you're taking a load of flack? It means you're over the target. That's the point. So the Tories are terrified, and then there's a bunch of folk in the media who seem to be terrified too. I'm sure we've got some friends out there somewhere, but they may not be Channel 4. and they may not be the BBC. And maybe the next speaker might say a few words about them. But I actually do want to say, because there are some people in the media who do deserve a huge amount of credit and thanks, because actually the truth is that without a bit of balance, without the ability and the capacity to talk, we wouldn't be here today. And so I personally want to say a massive thank you to Talk Radio and to GB News. They've done what you should do in a democracy. They've wanted more debate, more discussion, look at the other options outside the two-party system. And I think actually what they've done is they've done a massive, massive, constructive, positive contribution towards democracy in this country. Now, I do also want to thank Paul and his incredible team, because when we started on this journey, there were literally 5 or 6 of us. And it was extraordinary. And we did think that maybe we were barking up the wrong tree. And as we got, very few votes in the first few by-elections, it was hard. But here we are today, the biggest political rally in this campaign. We went from 0% to the mid-teens as this election started. And that is remarkable. Why did it happen? Why did it happen? I think for one simple reason. and Anne touched on it earlier, common sense. We stand for common sense. And we also stand for three things that are probably the most important three things for all of us: family, community, and country. And if you look at our key policies, and some of them take courage, and I'll talk about courage in a minute. I mean, Britain is completely broken. Britain needs reform at every level. But look at how the economy needs reform. Surely it's common sense to make work pay, to motivate people off benefits. It's common sense. That's why we have the policy to start income tax at £20,000. Surely it's common sense to have a vision for our healthcare in this country, still free at the point of delivery, before our enemies start attacking us. Common sense that we should have a bold ambition to get to zero waiting lists. We're the first party that had that ambition. Common sense. Surely it's common sense. No one else wants to talk about this word immigration, but surely it's common sense to have a smart immigration policy, not a mass immigration policy. It's basic common sense. And of course, the key to immigration is integration. It's absolutely critical. And that's who we stand for. That's what we are. And my goodness me, I also want to pay tribute to Zia. Didn't he speak brilliantly just now? Isn't he great? And surely it's common sense on law and order to get our police officers on the streets, protecting us, rather than sitting behind desks policing tweets, for heaven's sake. By the way, talking of social media, there's some breaking news that Nigel is going to break. Goodness me, you won't believe what's going on. It's common sense also, I think. And again, a lot of people get very upset. But I think it's common sense that there's only two sexes and two genders. I may be wrong. I think it's common sense that you adapt to climate change. You don't try and think you can stop the power of the sun, for heaven's sake. And that's why we're the only party that has a common sense approach to this issue. And I have to tell you that finally, we're the only party that has the courage to say net zero, frankly, is not the answer. Yes, let's use technology, but net zero is making us poorer, it's killing our jobs, it's killing our industries, it's killing our economy. It's an absolute piece of madness. Developed in Westminster, I actually believe it's the greatest act of financial self-harm ever imposed on a nation by the Wallies in Westminster. And there's many other policies of common sense that we stand for. But time is pressing. There's a football match this afternoon. Are we going to win? Yes, come on! But one of the hardest things in life is leadership and courage. We have the courage to talk about these common sense policies. We have the courage and the leadership to take the brickbats. We have the courage to say when something doesn't make sense, when it's wrong. But let me tell you, nobody, I believe, in this country has the courage, the passion, the conviction, the work ethic, and the leadership of the next speaker. Now, Nigel's taken a bit of a grief, a bit of abuse over the years, but what he has done is truly remarkable. And that's why, of course, the establishment hate him so much. And sometimes it's hard to tell the truth. Sometimes it's hard against all the pressure to stick at it. But that's what we at Reform do, and that is what Nigel does. And that's why I knew that the right thing that would give us an absolute turbocharged rocket boost at the start of this election campaign was for Nigel to get stuck in. And that, of course, is exactly what's happened. And that's why we've gone from sort of somewhere in the early to mid-teens in the polls. Where are we now? 18, 19, 21 poll had us at 24. Polls at 20, 21. I tell you what, though, the poll that matters is on Thursday. 4 days to go. And what I need to know from all of you is that you're going to work your socks off. Because with your help, with your enthusiasm, commitment, and energy, we will get millions and millions and millions of people to vote for reform, to vote for change. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Nigel, all our candidates, the effort, the work that's gone in. But above all, folks, I want to know, are you with us? I can't hear you. Are you with us? Are you with us? Thank you very much. July the 4th, vote change, vote Reform UK. Thank you.
Tice. And now to our next and final speaker, our returned leader. I don't need to tell you that Nigel has led from the front for his entire political career. He has led by example by relentlessly telling the truth when all were against him, whether the European Parliament, the banks, whoever. And if we all follow his example of speaking up and telling the truth and calling out corruption, we will create a better Britain. But beyond that, as somebody who has had the genuine honour of working alongside him for 15 years, Nigel is open, honest and authentic about who he is in day-to-day life, whether in a political rally or on the TV in a jungle. It's his authenticity that people are crying out for. Someone real. And the establishment that he is taking on, which is filled with lies, fear and spin, who want to make you do what they want you to do, are entirely disconnected. Not only from the realities of day-to-day life, but from the people that are living it. But not Nigel, who speaks plainly and tells it like it is, as he always does and continues to do, who has traversed the country, risking the perils of milkshakes and concrete, just to make sure that he can be seen and can see the public. Right now we are here, thousands of us. No other party in this country can do that. And ladies and gentlemen, that's because they have no party leader like this.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage.
Reform's honorary president Nigel Farage has decided not to stand as a candidate.
You're either running for Reform or you're not.
Nigel Farage is not going to stand.
I understand from Nigel Farage he is not going to be standing.
breaking news in the last few moments. Nigel Farage has tweeted this.
Is he going to stand?
So the big question is, does Nigel want to stand?
Only a few days after he completely ruled out running in this election, Nigel Farage called an emergency press conference to announce he'd changed his mind.
He is going to be standing at the general election as a candidate for reform.
He's having a run now after suggesting he wouldn't.
Nigel Farage has announced his return to politics. He is running in the upcoming British election.
Nigel Farage is returning to politics.
So I'm coming back as leader of Reform UK, but not just for this election campaign. I'm coming back for the next 5 years. I am going to stand in this election in the Essex seaside town of Clacton.
Guess who's back?
Wow. Good afternoon, Birmingham. Welcome to the thinking man and thinking woman's alternative to Glastonbury. Are we having fun? Good. I'm going to tell you what, unlike all the other stuffed shirts, we are real people. We believe in ourselves. We believe in our country. We believe in our future. But we also believe in having fun and enjoying life and being optimistic about the future of our great country. Now, I got to tell you, the last time I was in front of a crowd like this, it was the 31st of January 2020, and we were in Parliament Square, and it was the moment that we finally left the European Union, and Richard and I were up on stage, and what a moment! What a moment! It was something that I'd campaigned for over a quarter of a century, and it was simply because I believed for all that time that the best people to govern Britain were the British people themselves. That's what it was all about. Anyway, it was my honour to do the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom! And of course, the fireworks, which we always have. And we're out. And I thought, well, I've achieved my life's goal. We've got back the self-governance of our nation, and it's time for me to walk away. It's time for me to walk away from active politics, having done it for a quarter of a century, including, of course, 20 years in the European Parliament. An experience which I enjoyed a lot more than they did, let me tell you. And so, for the last 4 years, life has been pretty good. I've been able to help get GB News off the ground and do 4 shows a week, which I've loved. I've been back and forth across the Atlantic like a commuter, speaking at colleges, speaking at conventions. All 4 of my children are now grown up. Indeed, so much so that this week, on of all days, the 23rd of June, the 8th anniversary of Brexit, my first grandson was born as well. So life has been pretty good. Life has been content. I've not needed to work much on Saturdays and Sundays. I've not been subject to endless media attacks. We might come back to that, funnily enough. And I've earned more money than I've earned for 30 years, and life has been great. And suddenly Rishi calls a general election. At very short notice, I thought, well, it's impossible. I can't possibly come back with just 4 weeks to go. But I began to realise, as I travelled around the country, that I simply could not stand aside when the choice, or lack of choice, is between slippery Sunak, the biggest spinner since Blair, who's trying to convince us in what is now the 5th consecutive Conservative manifesto that somehow they're a party of low tax, when they put the tax burden up to the highest it's been since 1948, to convince us that they're a party of low immigration levels, and they got an 80-seat majority in 2019 on the back of that, and remember, with considerable support from the Brexit Party as well. We helped them enormously. But I couldn't stand aside and be lied to for the 5th manifesto in a row, when under Rishi Sunak's premiership, we've let in 2.5 million people in the last 2 years alone. Think about it. 1 in 30 people in this country has come in since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. And I couldn't stand aside and see a Labour leader. When I say leader, I don't believe the man has any leadership qualities whatsoever. None. And I think to lead a country through difficult times in a war that is in, I wouldn't quite go as far as that, sir, but I get the point. I do get the point. We need someone leading our country in difficult times when the world is perhaps in a more perilous place than it's been at any point in our lifetimes. You do need a degree of charisma. Now, Keir Starmer has the charisma of a... Well, I did use this 10 years ago in the European Parliament, but I'm going to dig it out of the cupboard. He has the charisma of a damp rag. And what does he stand for? What does he stand for? He can't even define what a woman is. He flips and flops and changes his mind. So I couldn't stand aside. I couldn't stand aside with a country that's in economic decline. And think about this. GDP per capita has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. People are getting poorer. And I couldn't stand aside in a country that is in genuine societal decline. Safety, people fearful of going out at night, people scared to even go out to their local pub, knives being carried wholesale by young people in our country. So we are, I've no doubt, in societal decline. And I couldn't stand aside in a country that is in cultural decline. And I must say, I thought young Zia spoke absolutely magnificently. Magnificently. A country that has forgotten what it is. A country that's forgotten where we come from. A country that doesn't seem to value our culture, our inheritance, and what we wish to pass on to our children. So I felt I couldn't stand aside with all of these things going on. And exactly 4 weeks ago, almost to the minute, I made a decision. And that decision was I was going to come out of retirement and come back to lead you. And what an unbelievable 4 weeks it has been. I'll tell you something, I've no doubt, something is happening out there. Something remarkable is happening out there, and I'm seeing it across all ages. Never before have I seen so many young people concerned about the future of their country. It's great. Really great. And this awakening crosses all classes, all ages, all races. Something remarkable is happening out there, and we're going up in the polls or down according to some. It all depends which methodology they use. But I know we're doing very well. Do you know how? Because when you threaten the establishment, they don't exactly come out with a tray of gin and tonics, now do they? And I think the establishment itself know that the Conservatives deserve to lose this election, but that Labour don't deserve to win it. And everywhere I go, I sense that we are the story. We're what people are talking about. At the breakfast table, at work, at the pub, at the bingo hall, wherever people go, we are the story. Already many millions already have said that they absolutely are going to vote for us. But there are many millions more who have simply not made up their minds, and they could come to us over the course of the next 4 days. And the establishment don't want us. You see, they're very happy for Keir to take over from Rishi, because it's not actually a change of government, it's a change of middle management. And the idea that Labour represent change is for the birds. It's going to be more of the same, just perhaps a little bit less competent than the Conservatives, if you can even believe that is possible. Now look, I'm used to the rough and tumble of political debate, and all's fair in love and war. But I have to tell you, one or two of the things that have happened over the course of the last few weeks go way, way beyond what is reasonable and what is fair. The first day of the campaign, I did an event down in Dover, where I talked about one of my pet subjects, the boats crossing the English Channel. And it was interesting because the BBC News channel took the speech live until they cut it off with the presenter saying, well, we cut away from that because here's Nigel Farage using his customary inflammatory language. and I demanded an apology. And I got one, which was remarkable. In fact, over the last year, I've had quite a few apologies, including from National Westminster Bank, which was rather good too. You see, I'm not afraid of standing up and fighting for what I believe in, whatever names they call me. But ever since that moment, the BBC have been a political actor in this general election campaign. Indeed, it was the BBC that started off the Russia hoax. Now, it's always the Russia hoax. We won the referendum, so they concluded it must be Russia. It must be the Russians that funded the Leave campaign. And this went on for year after year. And with us in the room today is Aaron Banks, one of the men who put the most money into that Brexit campaign. And Aaron had to fight the Russia hoax for years in the courts until he finally won against a Guardian journalist. Russia had nothing to do with our success in that referendum. So it was the BBC that started off the Russia hoax. And I understand why the BBC don't like me. I understand why the Labour Party don't like me. I understand why the Conservative Party don't like me, because unlike them, I could see that the war in Iraq 20 years ago was a mistake because there was never any endgame. And unlike them, the war that David Cameron launched in 2012 against Libya, I railed against again and again and again, but of course, it was supported by the Conservative Party, supported by the Labour Party, and what happened? A new organisation was created, ISIS. We created ISIS. Before the Libyan war, there were no boats crossing the Mediterranean, but because of David Cameron, a couple of million have now crossed the Mediterranean, and many, of course, now want to come to us. And unlike them, who seem to have no feeling or understanding for history, I predicted 10 years ago in the European Parliament that because of our actions, there would be a war in Ukraine. I said it openly, I said it clearly, and I was the only British political figure to get that right. And now we have this horrific conflict with perhaps up to 1 million battle casualties. But that gets twisted for the BBC because I predicted it into support for President Putin. Can I just be absolutely clear? I think what Putin has turned Russia into was a post-communist country with the wall coming down, with the hope of a democratic future, and he's turned it into a brutal dictatorship in which his enemies go to prison and die, in which journalists disappear. And I think what Putin has done in Ukraine is absolutely morally reprehensible in every single way. Have you got that? But the final straw for me with the BBC took place last Friday here in Birmingham. A Question Time special. I think it might be the 40th Question Time that I've done over the years. Now, I expect an audience not all to agree with me. But I don't expect the first questioner to be somebody who has produced 8 separate BBC programmes over the course of the last year, including Doctor Who, which I used to love, and they've completely ruined. And then And then the third questioner, a pro-Palestinian known activist. Does anyone think that group of people were representative of the great British public in any way at all? Well, I've had enough. I've had enough. Have you had enough of the BBC? Well, we will renew with added vigour our campaign over the course of the next few years, as we're going to be the leading voice of opposition. And I say that because the Conservative Party will be in opposition, but they won't be the opposition, because they disagree with each other on virtually everything. Think about it. The last 4 years, all we've had are internal Tory wars. They stand for nothing. I was told they're a broad church. Well, they're a broad church without any religion. It simply doesn't work. So we will, again, renew our campaign with added vigour to say that the state broadcaster has abused its position of power, and we will campaign as the leading opposition voice in this, not just in Parliament but in the country too. We will campaign for the abolition of the BBC licence fee. That's popular. Wow, that's popular. You like that, don't you? You like that, don't you? And then we have Channel 4. A so-called public service broadcaster. Well, let me tell you, what happened in Clacton Saturday week back was the biggest put-up job and smear campaign I have seen in my entire life. That man is a professional actor who has worked for Channel 4 in the past. Funny that, isn't it? He's very, very poshly spoken, but he does what he calls rough talking and makes pretty abusive TikTok videos, etc. From the minute he turned up in that Clacton office, he was using the most extraordinary Cockney accent I've ever heard. He core blimey gov, quite right. Quite right. Cockles and muscles, alive, oh, and all of it. But, yeah, he could have been from the fish market, but he wasn't. And interestingly, he did spend some time talking to two people in the office who both, it turned out, were undercover Channel 4 reporters. He seemed to know them. So from the moment he walked in, the whole thing was an act. And he tried to get Reform canvassers to say rude and abusive things. And when they wouldn't do it, he did it himself. And when I saw the video, initially I was horrified until I realised he'd gone completely over the top with the idea that every mosque should be turned into a Wetherspoon. And the next morning when confronted, he of course denied that he was a journalist, then he accepted it. But that of course has been used as the biggest smear against us. The racist campaigner for our party. Now look, Reform is a new organisation, it's a start-up. And there were requests put out for candidates to stand. And have we had a few bad apples? We have. Although, to my knowledge, nobody involved in an organised betting ring is standing for us, which is something. The Channel 4 story was a put-up job. It really is frankly gross that insult should be directed at all of you and all of our millions of voters. It is simply untrue. But I have to say, the bad apples are gone. We'll never have them back. And Channel 4, listen to this. YouGov polling published this morning. Reform UK is now polling higher with British ethnic minorities than the Liberal Democrats. So, Channel 4, put that in your bloody pipe and smoke it. But the attempt to stop us goes on. Would you believe today, since we went live at 12 o'clock, in the middle of Anne Widdecombe's speech, our live stream on TikTok was suspended for the use of hate speech. Now, I don't know about you, I've always found Anne Widdecombe rather charming. Principled, decent. I mean, she's a battler, she's a warrior. She's actually a fantastic role model for women in this country to go out and do things. So it's been tough. The last few days have been tough. I've wondered, am I really doing this all again? Well, I am. And I'm not downhearted. Are you downhearted? And we're doing much better out there than anybody in the media, in politics, even dares to imagine in their worst nightmares. We are doing well. We're doing well. And we are not a protest vote, even though there is much to protest against. People are supporting us because we have a vision. People are supporting us because we can see the way forward. People are supporting us because we stand up for values. People are supporting us because we believe in the family, and we put in our contract with the people, I think, a brilliant idea that you front-end load child benefit, so that if a mother with young kids wants to stay at home until they're of school age, we'll make it easier for them to do so. We must. We're the first party in years to talk in a positive way about marriage. Now, you know, not all of us have the best record in this particular area, but there's no doubt that children brought up in a loving married relationship have better life chances than anybody else. They just do. So we're pushing the idea of transferable tax allowances. And what is it that's really hurt the family? Well, part of it, I think, is the psychological damage that was done to us through repeated lockdowns. And there is no conversation about lockdowns, no conversation about mask mandates, no conversation about the fact they even wanted to vaccinate our young kids. No conversation, no debate, because Labour and the Conservatives both agreed. The cost of living also has impacted every family in this country. Runaway inflation, which happened chiefly because we've been living way beyond our means and because the Bank of England is led by the utterly useless Andrew Bailey. Utterly useless. So interest rates which had to go up have impacted particularly those with mortgages or those renewing. But think about this. Again, not discussed, not debated in the election campaign by Labour or Conservative. When the Conservatives came to power, our accumulated national debt was roughly £1 trillion. It is now £2.7 trillion, and the interest repayments are £90 billion a year, the same as the education budget, which is ironic, isn't it? Because they're the ones who actually, when they get older, are going to face paying all of this off. We're being frank with people. We've been badly let down. But one of the biggest costs for families is energy. Whether it's filling up your car because you live in a rural area and can't survive without it. But it's the electricity bill, isn't it? It's the gas bill. It's all of these things. And what have we done? We pursued aggressive net zero policies which have deindustrialised Britain, sent our manufacturing off to India and China and elsewhere, whilst loading the costs of subsidy onto the electricity bills of ordinary families. I'm for renewable energy if it works, but it gives us intermittent, expensive energy. So we would scrap the excessive, impossible to achieve net zero agenda of both parties. And for those worried about carbon dioxide, for those worried about that, well, we'll go for small, modular nuclear reactors as a source of continuous energy without any carbon output. So we're thinking a lot about families and the cost of living. We also believe that community matters. And that is why the mass immigration policies begun by Tony Blair and now accelerated by the Conservatives have led us, in many of our towns and cities, now to have completely divided communities where one group of people don't even talk to the other group of people. This is just plain wrong. Plain wrong. And it's into that we saw the horrific, shocking scenes after the recent local elections of sectarian voting in England. In England, sectarian voting happening, and by the way, a new form of politics in which women are completely excluded. Did you see Angela Rayner? Did you see Angela Rayner sitting there begging for the Muslim vote in her constituency? Not a single woman to be seen. But one of the most damaging things that is going on is what is happening in our schools, in our universities. A willful attempt to poison the minds of our young people to believe that we are somehow uniquely bad in terms of our history, when in fact completely the opposite is true. Completely opposite. Critical race theory, which tells an 8-year-old white boy that he's an oppressor and an 8-year-old black boy that he's a victim. This is a disaster. This won't bring us together. It'll drive us apart. It's terrible. I made this point to Trevor Phillips this morning, and he was dumbstruck for about 10 seconds, because everyone's bought in to the diversity and inclusion agenda. They all seem to have brought into the idea that we should all be divided up according to our race, according to our sexual preference, of which there are now so many I can't even keep up or understand. what many of the definitions are. Our view is different. Our view in reform is we don't care what race you are. We don't care what your sexuality is. We're not interested. We don't want to live. We don't want to live in a country that is divided up. We want to live in a country where everybody, regardless of who they are equal before the law. And I would say to those that have called us nasty names, none of those people with those tendencies are welcome in this party. None of them. And if anybody in this room is motivated by hatred and loathing of others because they're different, I invite you to leave the room now. Let's tell people who we are. But above all, we believe in country. And you can't be a country unless you control your borders. It's vital, it's essential. Now, I went out 4 years ago into the English Channel and I filmed the dinghies coming across. I challenged mainstream media. I said, why are you not covering this story? And I predicted that huge numbers of people would come. Well, now it is 4,000 boats later. It is 128,000 people, and 91% of them are male, and nearly all young male. And they're coming into this country from war zones in which they've been involved. They're coming into this country from areas that are dominated by gang culture. They're coming into this country from areas that are rife with terrorism. And you know what they do? They destroy their identity documents when they get to the 12-mile line. I have filmed them throwing their iPhones into the sea. Well, it's okay, because you pay for a new iPhone as soon as they arrive. And you pay for the 4-star hotel. And they get free medical care. They get free dental care. Who's got an NHS dentist here? But it isn't just the unfairness of it. It isn't just the fact that it's so wrong that British people ultimately get pushed to the back of the social housing queue. It isn't just that. It's far worse than that. This is a national security emergency, no less. And I was amazed that Keir Starmer the other night used that phrase for the first time. But one of the reasons that Rishi called this election early is his promise that the planes would go to Rwanda in July was never, ever going to happen. Never going to happen. And for Keir Starmer, well, on his 6 election priorities, he doesn't mention once legal or illegal immigration, and so this crisis is set to continue. But it's a bit rich. It's a bit rich for the Conservatives to say to Labour, it'll be even worse under you. How much worse can it get than it is right now? We know we will never solve this problem all the while we have an interfering foreign court in Strasbourg. We will campaign to leave the European Court of Human Rights. And of course, the first priority of any government is to defend this country and to defend its people. And we're living, as I mentioned earlier, in a much more dangerous world than any of us have seen in our lifetimes. So what have 14 years done to our services? The Navy and Marines, down by 15%. The Royal Air Force, down by 27%. The British Army down by 30%. And we pretend we're spending 2% of GDP on defence by adding in all sorts of other budgets. And this isn't a case of whether we go up to 2.5% by 2030 or 2029. We need massively increased defence spending and rebuilding our armed forces, and it needs to start right away. And we must recognise that for our future security, NATO and the relationship with America is absolutely key. And I promise you this, David Lammy and Keir Starmer want to take us into, just as Mrs May did before. In fact, was she the worst ever Prime Minister? There's a lot of competition out there, you know, isn't it? Very difficult. Just as Mrs May wanted to do, Labour will take us into the European Defence Union, taking us closer to that and further away from NATO, and we will fight that every single inch of the way. Many of these things are not even being discussed in this general election. In fact, the two big debates that I was part of with panels, I saw Penny Mordaunt up against Angela Rayner. And it turned into a sort of a cat fight. You know, you're going to put taxes up. No, you're going to put taxes up. None of them really telling us what they stand for. Nobody with a vision for the future of this country. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an optimistic, positive view of what we can do to help families, to help communities, to help our nation, perhaps to get back a bit of pride in what we are, in who we are, and where we can go in the future. That is where we are. And I know that under our electoral system, things are tough. We're likely to get fewer seats than the number of votes should deserve. But get seats next Thursday, we will, believe it, it is going to happen. And we'll likely see a Labour Party with, you know, not a particularly high share of the vote, with a massive number of seats. And part of what we're about is reforming the potentially corrupt postal voting system, reforming the voting system, getting rid of the unelected House of Lords in their current form. Yes, we are the reformers. We are the reformers in every sense. We believe that at the same time, you can respect your culture, your traditions, but move it into and make it appropriate for the 21st century. That is what we're all about. And I know that Starmer is going to win this election, but I believe this. What Thursday is about is the first step. It's the first major step that we take in an independent United Kingdom to turn this around. Britain is broken. Britain needs reform. And so, we will become the voice of opposition, and my intention, given that we're hitting 60,000 paid-up members today, over 200,000 people now, supporters on our database, we're growing rapidly. My intention is we build, over the course of the next few years, a mass movement, the likes of which has never been seen in the modern history of this country. A mass movement for real change. A mass movement that reflects the views of ordinary people of this country. And I believe that we can do this. Do you believe that we can do this? Are you with us on the journey for the next 4 days? Are you with us on the journey for the next 5 years? Are we going to change British political history? But if you're with me and support us and our candidates and our goals and are as unashamedly patriotic as everybody else on this platform, please stand up so that I can thank you. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you for being here today. Onwards to Thursday. Thank you.